Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're absolutely thrilled to have you here. We think it's a wonderfully timely topic. And as I mentioned in the chat feed just a moment ago, this really maps to a critical growth strategy for centrifuge in our region. So definitely welcome your feedback, input, hard questions. I just sent a memo to our board on this topic, so it's all deeply appreciated. We thought CES would be a good opportunity to go a bit deep on this particular topic of sustainability. And let me kind of give a quick sense of what we'll cover in the hour. If you jump ahead, a quick intro. I'll give you a little bit of backdrop on, set the context on this. And by the way, we'll have a couple guest speakers who kind of know this topic really well. Before I mention our speakers, I do want to acknowledge, Catherine and Abby from the Centrifuge team that have just done an amazing job of pulling together so many of the great insights and really diving into the to the content. And I think this will be really stimulating for you. But we also have our Director of Startups and COO, John Steiger, who is John, don't be offended, but he's a very endearing tech geek, and so he actually led the effort to bring centrifuge and startups from our region to CES last week. So we'll get some great perspective from John. We also have Patrick from GoSun, and I won't say a lot about this yet because we're going to hear from him directly. But we have a local startup that's here. We also are going to have a European perspective, someone I deeply respect who really knows this category well, Oriol Rivera, who I work with at Nestle and is now an innovation leader working for a lot of companies, is going to offer some perspective from a European perspective as well. We'll talk about the key themes of CES. We'll kind of provide some snackable highlights, and then we'll kind of bring it home so all of you understand why we're talking about this. How does this apply to what we want to do in Cincinnati? Okay, so let's jump into it. For those of you who don't know about Centrifuge, we take huge pride in being a startup catalyst. Our goal is to create the #1 startup hub in the Midwest and a top innovation center in the country. And we are, as you will come to appreciate, very anchored to strategic right to win pillars. Especially in this area. We have a flywheel of activity. We have a grocery store of services for startups that John, supported by many of our team members, run. We have a syndicate fund of funds, about 115 million in invested capital, and we're working on a new fund strategy relevant to this topic. And we also have a bunch of services for big companies that help them think and act like a startup, and they all complement one another. If you just flip to the next slide, just a sample. This is a very, very small list of the types of startups that we work with across all areas, and sometimes in partnership with our key players like QCA or Blue Chip Ventures or Lightship. But the idea is that we're really working hand in hand with startups at many, many different levels of the value chain. Okay. This is a slide I share in every presentation, and it's relevant to this topic because we really believe that the regions that have a concentration of talent, capital, and technology win. We see that with Pittsburgh, with AI and all the investment from Google. And we've identified 4 strategic pillars and a number of what we call urgency catalysts. And sustainability is one of the urgency catalysts. It's something that's really, as we'll soon learn, is kind of redefining what branding is all about. It's inseparable from hospital networks. It's at the heart of what's going on with fintech, and it's absolutely positively at the heart of supply chains. In fact, so much of the innovation we're seeing around supply chains with radical transparency kind of get to the heart of this topic. Okay, so that's the context. Let's dive into CES. So this is the world's biggest technology show, bar none. When I was leading digital at Nestle, this was the show of all shows. And, I think they've hit upwards of 140,000 attendees. And in addition to being a place where you visit the amazing displays, both for big companies like Samsung and even small startups, it's also a place with a lot of live networking, a lot of handshaking, a lot of deal making. And obviously that's something that in this year has been really challenging. What's interesting about this year, it's been all virtual. So you actually have, some of the downsides, you've less serendipitous discovery. I found in my many trips to CES that the best deals were had that you just stumbled into. You saw somebody walking down the boulevard and you suddenly did a deal. And that part is more challenged in a pure virtual environment. And there's also just a seeing is believing element where you touch and feel the technology. So for those that participated this year, we had a really high bar. That said, we've all gotten practice with virtual, and I do think that a lot of the companies that have participated have kind of used the challenges and opportunity to innovate. And so you've got a lot of really interesting and kind of curated environments. The CES hosts look more like CNN host or Fox News host. They're really trying to bring it to life in very powerful ways. And then we've also seen a lot of experimental innovation, especially from our neighbors down the street at P&G, which I'll talk about in just a moment. I won't go through all of these, but this is just a snapshot of the themes. We polled a bunch of folks. We kind of, data mined all the players that are out there. We looked at the news buzz. We looked at the social media buzz. But this is kind of roughly how it breaks out. And I think a lot of this has similarities to board memos that I sent at Nestle. But a few things have really bubbled up. Security tech is a really big deal. That's kind of, you just got all sorts of fancy cameras that are around the house, and they're becoming much more accessible, mapped to your apps and the like. Lot on batteries, tons on AI. Smart cities still remains a really big theme. Smart home robotics has really dialed up, and like security tech, much more accessible. And again, we won't get into all of that, but if you have a moment to dig deep into that, it's a pretty exciting space. Wearables have always been really big, but what's interesting today is that you've got a lot of integration between wearables and voice. Tons of sensors, lots of health tech. And I think anytime you kind of get into really advanced data and AI, you're going to have a lot of personalization. So some of these are some of the themes that build up. I would also add that, and I noticed that we have some friends from Miami that are on the call. A lot around gaming and extended reality. I do believe we've hit a tipping point where this notion of virtual experience is really going mainstream. So whether it's mixed reality, extended reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, that is kind of becoming almost table stakes. And you see that in a lot of the different exhibits. But for the purpose of today, for this hour that we have, diminishing hour, we're going to talk about sustainability, theme, circular economy, kind of climate tech. That's the area we want to drill down. And it obviously intersects with a lot of these areas. Go ahead, Catherine. Now, just a little bit of context on this topic, because we said, how green is CES? I mean, a few things we might want to think about is that as you've read in the newspaper, there's just like a massive amount of scrutiny on waste in the electronics industry, carbon impact of like data loads. And we know that e-waste, all the phones and gadgets, even though we've seen a lot of advancements in recycling or reuse, it's one of the fastest growing waste streams across the planet. You've also got a proliferation of plastics and packaging excess, something that I think every CEO in the CPG, FMCG place is trying to figure out really, really fast. And then lots of carbon footprint dynamics around the supply chain. That said, there is no question that what made this year's CES different is that we didn't travel. So there's obviously a net positive on that front. I think the big opportunities that emerge from this, and we'll talk about this in some of our examples, is innovation and recycling, reuse, and circular economy. There's a lot of energy efficiency dynamics around increased use of sensors, IoT, AI, and then you've also got technologies like solar or even kind of the shift to electric vehicles that are really getting commercialized, where a few years ago they were kind of in the industrial bucket, and today they've really become consumerized. Let me pause and just ask if John, do you want to add anything to this? As the guru who took us to CES last year, on anything I've said so far?
No, I don't disagree with any of that. I think that all makes sense. And I don't have anything to add because, to your point, I didn't get to wander around and get lost in a maze of booths to pick up anything else.
Okay, good. So let's move ahead. So how green is CES? What I wanted to do is kind of start with a local perspective. And I, like a lot of you, I was pretty proud that Cincinnati had a big outsized presence, both at the startup and at the big company level. And let me kind of start with, you know, kind of a high five to our neighbors at P&G, and you know, there's not only kind of a sustainability presence, but also a really unique approach to the how. You know, and I'm sure P&G, like many companies, was heavily invested in the CES in previous years, and I'm sure they were thinking, okay, how do we retain audience? How do we engage audience? CMO Mark Pritchard talks a lot about going from advertising to experience. So to some extent, they almost had the ultimate torture test. And one thing I really liked, and the social media buzz has been really positive on this, is they created a life lab, which every visitor became an avatar, which I thought was very cool. And then you were able to interact with different parts of the exhibit. One of the things that I thought was very cool about it is that they had a lot of P&G employees, and every time an employee kind of created an avatar, it was almost like there's like a different concierge that was there to help you. And I could tell that they were obviously trained to help visitors navigate. But I think the key takeaway there, and I'm a big believer that extreme challenges drive innovation. You know, you had this challenge of the world's greatest event, and you had to kind of renegotiate the interface with the consumer. And I frankly thought this was a very inspiring jump out of the gate in terms of connecting with consumers. And my guess is that those same principles that apply to winning my attention as a visitor in the B2B space definitely applies to the consumer space. Okay, but the part that probably impressed me even more is that, and P&G wasn't the only player, but you did see a lot of the big players. Sustainability was a very important halo over their positioning. And I think this quote from the P&G's Chief Sustainability Office is spot on. It's that they were very explicit about the sustainability innovation. So we saw that in a number of the technologies that were put on display. In fact, let's just kind of go to one of them. And some of these are pure teasers. I encourage you to check out the videos, and P&G's created some fantastic online content. So, you know, consider this a bit of a teaser, but the EC30, I mean, I think this is very, very breakthrough in terms of, you know, minimizing, it kind of removes the water from cleaning products, you know, creating a thin square that fits in the palm of your hand, but can expand when introduced to water to kind of create a lather effect. And again, kind of building on, you know, sustainability, circular economy principles. John, I think you've got a point of view on this. As I was doing the roll call, I think you got pretty excited about this.
Yeah, this is really cool. And I have to say, a few years ago, this was, I think, one of P&G's new ideas. I believe the first, I don't know, this came out to the world in 2018, 2019. And I give a lot of credit that Procter actually, I think, launched the idea on Indiegogo to do a bit of a test market to see if it was something with broad appeal. And then it was called, I had to look this up, it was like DS3. But apparently it's been slightly renamed and now mainstream. And I think it's a really exciting idea. If you think about all of the supply chain costs that goes into moving packaging and water around, when really what you actually want is whatever it is that's in this little sachet or a square here. I think that's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, we hear a lot about supply chain resilience and how supply chains have been taxed in COVID. And I think it's actually created some very positive industry pressure to think about the upside of kind of more efficient packaging, lower weights and the like. So again, kind of I thought this was an inspiring one. And another example we have, and this is actually from the PG Ventures group. They had a competition that, you want to go ahead, Catherine, jump ahead? Yeah, this was PG Ventures had a competition, kind of open sourced innovation, and the winner had a product called Saver Pack, which kind of eliminates moisture from containers before food deteriorates. And again, a good example of how to preserve food or other products presumably. And when I was a juror on the Con Innovation Jury a couple of years ago, I saw a few technologies that were attempting to do this as well. And I do really think that this is, a breakthrough. And my guess is that we'll see a lot more activity like this in the coming years. Okay, so that's P&G. Now I wanted to turn over to our special guest, Patrick Sherwin, who is the founder and CEO and endearing tech geek, as I have learned, of GoSun, a company that is growing. It's based in the North Side. Patrick, you got a big award from CES, and you're building a portfolio of consumer products. Tell us a little bit about your mission.
Oh, thanks, Pete. This is great. We bring portable power to people. We use solar in a way that's producing more resilience and independence among an audience of customers that want to thrive off-grid. And off-grid happens in your backyard, and it extends to the boat, the beach, the barbecue, the campsite, RV. Basically, we want to make sure that you can maintain the comforts without increasing consumption. We know that basically all of this is about reducing consumption on some level, but we want to do that without compromising the performance of products, the convenience and comforts that we've come to live and know. And we find that we can do this very well with solar. So we've come up with a line of solar products that they're all sitting behind me here. They can cook, they can clean, as you see with the award that we found. We've got when you're now off grid, you can take everything and the kitchen sink. We have a cooler, a solar powered cooler. I don't want to get too much into the details of the tech here, but ultimately we've developed, what we call the fuel canister of the future. This thing offsets charcoal or ice. You can charge it up with the sun, and with it, you can, take care of all your essential needs.
Now, Patrick, tell me about, you're sounding a little formal here, and I talked to you a couple of days ago, and there was that passion for solar. Like, what was the light bulb, pun intended, or the flash of light, the beam of sun that ignited your passion around kind of being a real pioneer in this space?
Honestly, I was about 8 years old. I had a shop in the honeysuckle tree in my backyard selling clay pots and other things to the neighborhood mothers. And one of the neighborhood boys, an older teenager, ruined the creek in my backyard by draining his oil into the creek out of his car. And I had the creek thriving with amphibians and fish. This is Clough Creek out in Anderson Township, Cincinnati. And when I watched that happen, I realized the impact that man can have, and I realized how stupid we can be and how we need to come up with ways to prevent ourselves from destroying this beautiful planet. And I've been working with solar since high school. Back then, it was basically, just to sustain life out in space. But there was the inklings of solar becoming commercially or consumer available. And over the last 20 years, I've been trying to figure out how to get solar to power our lives. Came up with a solar oven that basically came out of a hot water heater. It came off of a rooftop, and instead of throwing it away, I sort of turned it into a hot dog cooking device, and the rest is history. We launched these on Kickstarter about 7 years ago, and GoSun took off.
Now I got to ask you this. I noticed a couple of my former Nestle colleagues are on the call. Can you really heat up a Nescafe or a coffee? Does that really work?
Yeah, it will. It takes about 40 minutes to get to that temperature that you want and that requires pretty good sunlight. So first thing in the morning may not be the best product to rely on. We came up with a coffee brewing system that runs on 12 volt in a travel cup with a French press that's integrated. We launched this on Kickstarter just this fall back in October, and no one had thought to do this. It's amazing all the opportunities that exist out there when you look at the essential needs and the new technology that's available to us. And a place like CES helps you realize you can do anything you can think of with electronic controls, sensors, AI, lithium-ion batteries, and then we're going to put solar on top.
So on that point, we got quite a few entrepreneurs on the webinar. I mean, how big a white space is this? I presume it's still incredibly underdeveloped, but I'm sensing as I read the pitch book, Climate Tech reports that there's a lot of money coming at it. So how big a space, and this is a self-serving question, but how bullish are you on doing it in the middle of the Midwest?
If you can make it work here, you can make it work anywhere. I think it's absolutely massive, and I think indicators from the market that Tesla has created. I mean, you look at their valuation. The entire electric vehicle world is synonymous with solarizing the world. They're almost one and the same thing, and I don't think there's really any limitation with smart grid and energy storage technology. We could go 100% renewable energy, and in fact, many nations have. The world needs to as soon as possible. And so I appreciate that you're putting sustainability on your urgency list because it is an absolutely urgent global crisis.
Thanks for that. And let me go back to John for a moment. I mean, John, you also kind of tested this hypothesis that we could be a green hub in partnership with Flywheel and HCDC. Can you just share a few thoughts on whether we have what it takes to kind of create a pipeline of entrepreneurs in this broadly defined sustainability area?
Absolutely. So yeah, we got for the pre-accelerator we ran in partnership with Flywheel and HCDC. We had 40 plus applications, wound up with 8 terrific companies, and really the diversity and strength of the ideas in every sense was pretty impressive. Everything from things that relied very heavily on analytics to kind of new modes of farming, recycling. It was pretty inspiring, and frankly, I hadn't seen as much of that in Cincinnati. It was just great to see, and I think to some extent the sustainability has moved beyond just something we do for the planet. But I mean, even if you are a hardcore, relentless capitalist, reducing waste is a profitable thing to do, right? So I think we've kind of started to hit our stride where all the interests are really aligned, and it's no longer something we should just expect to see in Berkeley.
So we'll come back to that, and so that was a bit of advertisement for Cincinnati, but I do want everybody on the audience to appreciate the fact that we are absolutely serious about this, and there's a lot of foundations that are being built. So let's dig into a little bit more stimulation. And again, I'm kind of hoping that especially for the entrepreneurs on the call, that you'll absorb some of this and think, okay, there's a piece of this value chain that I could own, and ideally do it in Cincinnati. Okay, so some notable innovations and announcements. And Patrick, you're not off the hook because we deliberately started with the solar player. So let's go to, one of the companies that really impressed me was Samsung. We got a couple examples from them, but there was definitely kind of a leadership by example. And one area that I thought was particularly powerful is, the console with the solar cell on the back that lets them recharge using indoor and outdoor light. Patrick, I mean, this impressed me, but again, I'm not an expert like you are on these things. Does this just feel real to you?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think we have to realize that the alkaline battery is also one of those things of the past. I mean, the internal combustion engine has its days numbered, charcoal, ice. It's because we can do things better with using much less energy. And I think you touched on that in your intro. This is absolutely a winner. We've had our solar powered calculators for years. I didn't realize that a remote would use very much power, so I'm not sure why this took us 20 years to develop, but good job, Samsung.
And I presume those plastic bottles means that's going into the actual the composition of the product, which we're seeing a lot more of. On this next one, you know, I get pretty excited about this. You know, when I was at Nestle, the venom in social media about plastics made me want to crawl under the bed every night. But we are starting to see a lot more innovation with packaging. We're seeing plastic packaging kind of getting downcycled into alternative uses. And I particularly liked the upcycling and eco packaging that we saw from Samsung, where they're literally almost prefabricating the cardboard so it can become something else. And you kind of look at that and say, duh, like why didn't we come up with that like 10 years ago? And again, so a lot of it is not necessarily just technology. It's that there's clearly technology to kind of cut the cardboard in certain ways, but a lot of it is a creative proposition. And that creativity leads to alternative use, and kind of the more you can reuse the product, the better for the planet. And so kind of kudos on this one. And by the way, my panel of experts can jump in at any time. You can even correct me if I interpret this the wrong way. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Now, I definitely want to hear more from you, John, on the, there's just a lot of stuff on cars. We are absolutely positively in a step change pivot to electric vehicles. We've obviously read a lot of news about this, coming from, Tesla, and then, from China. And these are initiatives where there's just like massive investment. What's particularly interesting about the Sono motors is that, they're trying to really bring it to the masses. The external, the exterior is comprised of, hundreds of solar cells that have been integrated, into the product. But again, kind of different ways of thinking about, what the EV car is like. Patrick, any quick perspective on this one?
I think your house uses about the same amount of power as your car back in the day when we actually used to take our cars places. So, the solar on this vehicle will give it a couple extra miles. It's not going to give you that daily 30 miles drive time, but it's super cool. Yeah, a couple miles is a couple miles.
And it keeps getting better, right? I mean, I don't know if it's like Moore's law that applies to solar, but every year you can pack more power from the solar cells, right?
We're topping out around 20% efficiency at the moment. There's rumors around 30, and of course, our evacuated tubes, this will be 80% efficient, but it's making heat, not electricity.
Okay, excellent. Okay, let's jump ahead. I love this from GM. Mary Barra gave a very well received kind of prominent keynote speech, and part of what we're trying to do at Centrifuge is convince every big company to kind of either partner with startups or create their own startups, because it just helps them move faster. And what I thought was really powerful, I mean, there was quite a bit of EV news from GM, but I thought it was really smart that, almost in an effort to kind of think through what the future electric vehicle supply chain will become, they basically created a startup that is around delivery assistance, making really kind of aiding that whole supply chain of multiple players feeding in. I certainly hope and pray a lot of that is taking place in the Midwest. I'm assuming it will be, but really big investment, $7 billion, not just going into this startup, but into that whole electric vehicle space. But we've got a whole new supply chain that is emerging, aided by internally developed startups. And I am really, really bullish. One thing you'll hear from me ad nauseum is I'm a big believer that, we live in the middle of the great supply way. We service the world, we service the US, and it's getting even more powerful. I talk a lot about it in the context of, Amazon's moved into our backyard. We're now the #1 e-commerce hub in the country. But you've also got the auto players redefining supply chains as well. And then what I want you to think about is startups out there, is that where can you claim territory? Where can you claim value? Where can you find a Mary Barra out there who has an unmet need and is looking for startup agility to make that connection? Let's see what else we got. Hyundai, John, you love this. Speak to us.
Absolutely. So first of all, I think this car is gorgeous, right? I give Hyundai huge credit for their design chops. I'm old enough to remember when they left the U.S. market because their cars were so bad. So first there's that. Secondly, I think this really speaks to the kind of mainstreaming of electric vehicles, right? Tesla is wonderful and exciting, but increasingly, electric vehicles use a tiny fraction of the number of parts that are considerably simpler to build than internal combustion vehicles. So you have Bosch and other big manufacturers making components and sub-assemblies. So like we really are going to see electric vehicles working their way all the way down from, they're not all going to be $100,000 Teslas. This will be very mainstream. And I'm shocked at how quickly it's happening. And I think it's going to force the manufacturers to compete on design. So not all the cars will look the same, right? Because if all the guts are provided by third parties and there's not all that many, you don't have to make drivetrains or any of those things anymore. They can really focus on making really cool new form factor, beautiful cars. And I think this is definitely one of them.
Fantastic. Now I wanted to bring on the next slide. There's a ton of innovation going on from other regions, especially in Europe. And a lot of these things got a little bit hidden because we were virtual, we kind of had to pick often the big players. So if you were at CES, you'd actually spend a lot of time in Eureka Park and see thousands of startups. But I wanted to ask my former colleague and dear friend, Oriol Rivera, to just kind of comment on some of the European innovations that had a presence at CES this year. Oriol, are you with us?
Yes, I'm
Welcome.
here. Hello, thank you, Pete. Hello, John.
From Barcelona.
From Barcelona. So, yeah, from the European perspective, the CES, I think, has been very interesting. The European Commission participation. The European Commission in Europe is very relevant, especially to venture capitals and to funds of funds, because a lot of public money is being invested. They have a big budget of they have invested so far 250,000 million euros and in 1,500 startups the last years, for instance. It's just as an example of how important the strategy for Europe is getting in startups and supporting this in CES Las Vegas. Some of the two speakers I think is important to take into our account is Roger Habenik, that he's the deputy chief of the European Investment Fund, and also Thierry Breton, which is the European Commissioner for the Internal Market and of the European Commission. Internal Market is like the Ministry of, is industry. They are in charge of industry, services, digital, defense, and space. So they have been speaking there. Not only speaking, but actually they have very deep pockets, especially in Europe. And some kind of relevant startups that have come is iTron, for instance, is a European startup that does 3D printed buildings. The interesting thing is that it's a circular economy because they have designed this 3D printed service so that they recycle the material that you use to print some of the furniture at home or some of the elements at home, really nice designs and book, and then you can reuse it, you can make it yourself. So it's circular, but also the material that they use is not actually plastic, but it's derived from vegetable sources like potato and other kind of sustainable materials. So it's very sustainable. There is also a water purification system, the water solutions, and also a very interesting startup that has created 100% recyclable paper, smart paper, to wrap stuff like products, and it has electronic circuits inside, so it records the temperature changes along the supply chain and the delivery at home, and you can read that paper with a smartphone. So that is super cool because you can many times in this kind of deliveries, if there are changes in the temperature, sometimes the products arrive in wrong conditions. So it's a way of providing traceability also, and maybe some other papers in the long term. There is also another startup that I like very much, and I know personally, that is Novamit. Novamit is like the Impossible Foods. The difference with Impossible Foods is that they do not produce, they produce stick. Impossible Foods only is capable of producing hamburger, but what they produce is actually real like steak. The taste is exactly the same, 100% vegetable. Is a startup from here, from Barcelona, from the scientific part of biotechnology, and they use they don't modify genes or nothing like that, but they do actually modify the cells of vegetable cells of like flour, and they convert it into either fish or like chicken tenders, for instance, and they are delicious. I've tested them.
All right, Oriol, thanks so much. We may come back to you for a little bit of extra perspective, but I'm deeply flattered that you parachuted in from Europe, and I know that Barcelona is a real hub for breakthrough innovation. So psyched that you're with us. Okay, so let's go through a few more. And again, these are just teasers. There's so much to absorb, but these are some favorites. I loved Lasso, that actually recycles your recycling. It's kind of a recycling robot that accepts, identifies, prepares recycling for proper, reuse. It separates glass, plastic, and paper. And again, these are things that are not entirely new, but they've always been talked about in an industrial context. $100 million to partner with Rumkey or whatever to do this. And now it's like entering the consumer space. And, if in fact the technology is that accessible at that level, pricing and the like, just imagine the other things that we can do there. Okay, let's keep going, and then we'll, the bee box. This is kind of designed for the backyard beekeeper. Ironically, the winner of John's, John and Flywheel's Sustainable Sensity Accelerator was actually Brandon, the beekeeper. And so we think this is a really interesting space. And I think in this one, they have, like a 6-foot pole that kind of keeps the bees away from, away from people, but you can kind of put it in very accessible places. But, again, kind of a good example of, kind of an innovation. I think we're going to see a lot more of this as everybody's trying to save the bees. Anybody want to jump in on the last two? Quick comment, quick tweet. Okay.
I actually saw the beehive also here in Barcelona in the Mobile World Congress. It was really amazing. I think it's an amazing example of what the smart city should be like fostering the development of the bees and the sustainability. And it's a really amazing example. And the sensors are super interesting.
Fantastic. Lot of stuff on blockchain. In this particular case, it has to do with, supply chain, the kind of the plastic supply chains. And again, it's like, this whole issue of sourcing, transparency. We're going to hear a lot more about that. This committee I'm chairing around supply chain, transparency is the operative word. And if, by the way, if any of you listening want to double click on this topic, let us know. We'll jam on it. Okay. Jumping ahead. Now this one was interesting. John and I were debating this earlier. Now, this is kind of a crowd favorite, but it's one where it kind of raises the complicated side of sustainability. I mean, you can kind of say that, easy to go ice cream, then espresso of ice cream, maybe prevents a few trips to the local ice cream store. But it also, if you actually read the discussion online, there's a lot of, it's complicated, and, it's harder to recycle, at least right now than, Nespresso pods. And, so some of these new technologies are bringing new challenges. And again, my guess is that they'll figure themselves out, but this one kind of cuts both ways. I don't know, John, if you want to add some perspective on this one. You're the one that reminded me about it.
Yeah. So I have 2 points of view. First, these things are cool, but secondly, not a lot of counter space left in most kitchens, even in big, stupid American kitchens. And secondly, this just reminds me of the Juicero. Does anybody remember the Juicero?
I do. I almost.
Yeah. So it is a cool idea. I wonder what kind of technology it could spawn. I would be dubious that it's going to be huge, but I always love to see the kind of ideas that come to wonder what they'll morph into if they really become mainstream.
My only pushback on you is that the Nespressos and the Keurigs of the world got a lot of grief early on. Why would people ever want a coffee system? But there is a convenience factor that I think, and right now to get soft serve ice cream, you always have to take a trip. So there is, so anyways, so we'll come back to this one next year and debate this a bit. Just a lot of, I think we're in a golden age of packaging. Packaging is going to be a big focus for us. We've got a board member from Michelman that's really on the bleeding edge of, different types of packaging, but we saw a lot of this at CES. Living Packets is, it's basically reusable, and it's kind of a recyclable, expanded polypropylene. It features kind of ink displays instead of, single use. But I think we're going to see a lot of this, and even some of the initiatives that we've heard about where the consortiums of big companies are kind of coming together on, okay, let's, we've got a reusable Haagen-Dazs dish or whatever, or almost going back to the old model where you'd have the milkman take you're just going to have a lot of reuse models. And I frankly think it's a golden age for entrepreneurs, because I think there's some creative elements that could be brought to the table here that would get consumers pretty jazzed. One Life air purifier, sustainable, ultra quiet, German engineered air purifier. I think that got quite a bit of buzz from the event, and you can kind of see some of the, the benefits that shined. Go ahead. Oriel, you want to comment on this, or John? Anybody want to? Oh no, Patrick, I think you took some interest in this.
It reminds me a little of the device that we developed that uses 1/10 of the water than a typical faucet, so that you can have the sink anywhere. Reducing water consumption is huge, especially hot water, a massive energy need in a home. And so I would be curious if L'Oreal went at this in an effort to reduce water consumption or sell another piece of technology.
I think also that L'Oreal is important follower here and an important leader in innovation in Europe. Many years ago, they developed a skin protection patch, etc. So it's worth to take a look at this innovation, which is coming, has been appeared in CES Las Vegas, because they are kind of very advanced in the market. They are pioneers. They can also influence and kind of trigger other people, other companies, other startups. So it's very interesting. Maybe this later develops for someone else inventing something at home, because a lot of people is following L'Oreal.
I think you're going to see a lot of these things, and in some relationship to the example we saw from P&G earlier. But interesting, like yesterday, I went to the 80 Acres grand opening, or many of us did, virtually. They've got a state-of-the-art facility. But what's so amazing about vertical farming, it uses 97% less water. I mean, that is just mind-boggling in terms of the potential. I remember the chairman of Nestle would often say, we're gonna run out of water before we run out of oil. And he was right, if you kind of look at the trends. And so you've got these technological breakthroughs that are really, reducing the water requirement, and also bringing, to John's point earlier, a lot of efficiency, because, less water is less weight, less cost, more efficient supply chains. Okay. Schneider Electric Energy, Schneider Electric is really, we will not do justice to their innovations. I would definitely, if you're passionate about this topic, go look at some of their content, both from CES, but, they are really, pushing, smart, resilient, sustainable homes from a lot of different angles, use of sensors and the like. But just a really good example. By the way, they also have really good, fantastic content on their website if you're just kind of looking to bookmark, content to keep you on the bleeding edge of green.
And it's a great example of a company moving from one domain to another. So Schneider Electric has made programmable logic controllers that run factory floors forever. So taking that kind of control and optimization technology and applying it to the home is probably for them a great step down in complexity, but up in terms of scale and
If
potential.
you're interested in connecting with Schneider Electric, they have an innovation hub here in Barcelona and a whole development of smart cities. So if you are interested, I can help to connect with them.
Oh, good. Oriol, you're like a big resource on this call. Hey, John, I want to throw a question your way from Josh Gittleman, who wanted to know, how do entrepreneurs turn their ideas into physical products without having an engineering background? And kind of how do entrepreneurs build their minimally viable products without making the process too cost intensive in the beginning of starting the venture? And I know that's a whole webinar topic, but maybe you can give us a couple, winning tweets.
So yeah, Josh, I'm John with an H at centrifuge.com. It's a challenge, right? So there's two. First, it depends if you're talking something that's electromechanical or a single unit, right? 3D printing is like the great leap forward in terms of building minimal viable products for many kinds, first articles for many kinds of physical products. If it's something that's electromechanical, I don't have an easy answer for that. I wish I did, because even the simple part of putting together breadboards or different Arduino powered devices require some level of technical know-how. So the best answer is usually find a technical co-founder, but feel free to reach out.
Okay, good question here. Okay, let's cover a couple more and I'll let my esteemed guests jump in. Sustainable PCs, you kind of see a nice little curve of innovation, but they're continuing to use recycled plastics and get even more sustainable. And again, I think this is an area that is really, really important for our good environment. And high fives to HP on this. Go ahead. Another example of just, and again, a lot of products are using recycled products, but I think it's kind of becoming the norm. The cost structure is going down. And I think for those of us that are worried about single-use plastics, this could be part of the answer. I'm not trying to say we excuse the excess use of plastic. We clearly need to deal with that. But again, it's that kind of downcycling approach that I think is a really big idea. Anyone want to quickly jump in on the last couple slides?
Like recycled plastic is the way to go. I heard from CES that it's in short supply and high demand, so the prices are rising. It's just ironic and hilarious. And boy, if I was Procter & Gamble listening in here, I would be trying to figure out how to do the circular thing with the products I'm producing and get them back in my hands so I can reuse them, upcycle them.
Okay, that's what I love about startups. Take every advantage. Okay. Ampere Bluetooth shower speaker, kind of reminds me of my first 10-speed bicycle where the bike, the wheel kind of powered the light. But again, you're kind of powering your speaker on your shower using that, the water flow to stay charged. I think that's actually pretty damn smart. Also very good that the speaker is above the water. Again, I don't know if it's a technology breakthrough, but you know what? Credit, that's a darn good idea. It's one of those, damn, how come I didn't think about that?
It's probably slowing down your water flow, therefore slowing your water consumption down to boot.
Patrick throws in some extra icing on the cake. I love it. Right on. Okay, onward. Patrick, you have to jump on this. I love this. This
is a real curious one. I've been looking into this technology for years. This guy doesn't have a whole lot of data, but it's easy. That's the other random world of startups. You can always throw some vaporware. I'm not calling this vaporware, but it's back to the panelist question or in the chat. It all depends on how technically savvy your team is and how big the problem is you're going to solve. And this guy's trying to solve a big one. I don't know if he's bringing the tech, so we'll see.
Yeah, interesting. But I do know that there's a lot of work here. Even one of the GPs that we've invested in, Material Impact, just a brilliant team out of Boston. They've invested in zero mass water, which is kind of doing something similar, but a little bit more at scale, not necessarily for our little camping trips. But again, kind of think about the implications of, if you can figure out a way of kind of, converting air into water, might solve a lot of interesting challenges, right?
Yeah, it's not all that easy, but there's a lot of energy involved in doing that. But
Fair push. The ice cream dilemma.
another kudos to the Midwest and abundant fresh water here in Cincinnati. So if your startup requires water, we got you covered.
Good water too. Okay, let's keep going. Let's get it. So it's all right. What else we got here? Lots from Bosch. Just check out their website. They're doing some fantastic stuff across IoT, green devices. I mean, you name it. Really, if you're looking for like a high watermark, pun intended, on green innovation, just a lot of good work there. Jump ahead. We couldn't do a webinar without talking about masks, but this is the tech gaming company that kind of converted its manufacturing, facility to, eco-friendly wearable masks. Gotta love that. Don't need to spend a lot of time on this one. Coding with, precisely, formulated sustainability in mind, repels bacteria, hard water deposit, unlike, but just, another kind of good example of a consumer product that's really squarely in the sustainability space. Now, any final comments from John on the tech, or Patrick or Oriole? Quick tweets before I say a few words about Cincinnati. All right. So I wanted to leave you with just a bit of an inspiration around how all this dovetails back to our region. Again, we're trying to build a top innovation economy. And if you flip to the next slide, this was my first memo of the year to my executive board, big co's, startups, mayor of Cincinnati. And my point was that the rapid acceleration of sustainability in every sector of our economy is potentially transformative. It's creating scalable opportunities to drive near-term, long-term investment, business and job creation, talent magnetism, and competitive advantage as a region. And I know that we are at Centrifuge. First off, if you knock on our door, on one hand, we don't care what you're doing, we will help you if you've got, but we do believe there is a unique opportunity to bring entrepreneurs from the outside as well as capital around a strategic pillar like this of sustainability. And I think, if you flip to the next slide, a good example of that is, what I mentioned. And again, if you think about, I spent most of my holiday, you may think I'm crazy, reading every big company in Cincinnati's, ESG report or climate report. And our companies are setting some really, really big, ambitious goals. You see them here. And even, we get a lot of briefs from companies like P&G that are looking to address these issues. And this, I think, is a golden era for green entrepreneurs. And selfishly, I want a bigger fair share in Cincinnati. We know that to do these commitments, a lot of money, a lot of investment is going to be made into startup economies. It could be Singapore, it could be Tel Aviv, it could be Pittsburgh, but in my view, a lot of it needs to be in Cincinnati. And this is why I appeal to all of you on the phone to think opportunistically about solving these unmet needs for these partners down the street. And I promise you, they are eager to work with startups. They may not know entirely how to work with startups, but we are working with them on that. And we are also working with startups like yourselves to make sure that you're ready. But there is a very unique opportunity for us to create a unique value proposition between big company needs at a time when there's massive pressure on the green front from consumers, regulatory, and even UN sustainability goals. It's a really good opportunity, and we're trying to figure out how to turn that into gold for our region. And if you flip to the next slide, just gives you a sense of think about as we become the #1 e-commerce hub in the country, how that could change the mindset for how we build sustainable processes around e-commerce, which is an area where a lot of people are complaining about excess packaging, but could we turn that into a big opportunity? Go ahead. I mentioned 80 acres earlier, but I'll mention it again. You've seen in the paper, raised 100 million or so from private equity, more to come probably. But they are reinventing the future of farming. And I think that is bellwether for what's to come. How do we do more of those initiatives? How do we get in front of the curve? How do we think critically about the reinvention of supply chains and the like? Okay, what else we got? And yeah, and if you're trying to figure this out, whether you're a big company or a small company, we'll go on that journey with you to figure out what that idea might be. This is something we do for big companies, but John and his team, they will work with startup entrepreneurs to find that sweet spot. We even just launched a service where if you're a member, you get free analytics from us, via PitchBook across all sorts of different areas. But we will do anything we can to help you find the idea, nurture the idea, find the connections for the idea, and ultimately shine a bold green light on Cincinnati. Let's see if we got a final one here. There we have it. Any final questions from my esteemed panel of experts as well as the audience? I think we got a couple minutes left.
1 minute exactly. Phenomenal.
1
job,
minute
Pete.
exact. Okay. John, do you want to make a final pitch to prospective entrepreneurs?
So first, I threw my Calendly link out in the chat. Always happy to talk, see if there's something we can do. And I have to say, watching CES from a distance made me realize how much there is in kind of tactile and wandering around and getting lost. And I look forward to going back someday in person.
And we will make this deck available as a recording. So I'm sure folks that might be interested or might even be a little bit skeptical about whether Cincinnati can win. I encourage you to share it, and we'll indicate which parts of the presentation align with sections of the video if you want to kind of cut right to the chase. But we had a fantastic attendance. I really appreciate your participation. Thanks again to Abby and Catherine for fantastic prep work, and to John and Oriole and Patrick for making me sound a lot smarter than I am. Thanks for your participation.